talk on adopting Bitcoin, it reminded me that Bitcoin is not the first open protocol that we have adopted. So I wanted to create an analogy between some of the first protocols that were adopted, how they were adopted, how it looked like, and how is that similar to Bitcoin. So the first off, we just have to ask, what is a protocol? A digital protocol is a word you've heard many times here, but a protocol is a very simple concept. It's a simple set of agreed upon rules for communication between two parties. So the whole, a traffic light is red, means go, or a traffic light is, if it's green, it means go, if it's red, it means stops. But a more, generally, even kids know the knock-knock joke protocol. That's a more analogous to digital protocols, because if I say knock-knock and you don't say who's there, then the protocol stops. So if you break the rules, you're basically just ignored. So in the digital age, we realize that you can't make protocols that require enforcement by police because it's not scalable. So with the traffic light example, you can't get the police to look at every single person's laptop and when they break the rules to step in. So more like the knock-knock joke, if they break the rules, they shouldn't be able to affect the system. These protocols could rely on the police to be enforced in the real life, but more and more we are seeing protocols that can do this in the digital age without the reliance on violence. So over time, these protocols also become invisible. So when we stop at the red light, we just stop automatically, and if it's green, we just drive. So a very big thing we have to differentiate here is the difference between protocols and apps or services or platforms or all of these other things. So apps, services, protocols move very fast because they move on top of protocols. So you're expecting them to move fast. But protocols, on the other hand, like Bitcoin, move slowly and they are stable. But this is by design. So technology moves fast and we always expect better, faster, cheaper. But this is only possible because the protocols move slow and they are stable. So this is a very big differentiation where we expect a new iPhone every year, but we don't expect a new base layer protocol every year or two, or 50 for that matter. So the big thing that started the adoption of open protocols globally was TCP/IP. Now this talk's not supposed to be technical. There's a lot of technical stuff in it, but I just want to present how Bitcoin fits into this world that's already established. So TCP/IP, So TCP/IP started the global adoption. And what TCP/IP basically is, it's a protocol. We first created a computer, and then we created two of them, and they needed to communicate. And once we figured that out, we wanted to connect to two networks that run on completely different continents to talk to each other. So there was a need to agree on a standard set of language that these computers can speak. So even in North Korea or behind the Chinese firewall, they still use TCP/IP as a standard to communicate. So it's gained global adoption because it's open, fair, and robust. And it's similar to Bitcoin, where more people will realize it's open and fair, and they can opt into using it, or they won't. But if more and more people realize that it's fair and open and robust, then the network effect starts. So now it's 50 years since TCP/IP was developed, and we all use it in our daily lives. For those of you that's been on your phone right now, you're actually using TCP/IP, and you're probably not even knowing it. So we've all used it today, but no one actually knows what it stands for or what exactly the rules are. We just trust that because everybody's using it, they are fair. So today, virtually every single device that connects to the internet uses TCP/IP. And that happened in 50 years. This standard was established. So basically, TCP/IP, it wasn't the first open protocol, but it was the first open protocol that gained global adoption. And it laid a stable bedrock for the entire wave of open protocols that came afterwards. So there was the protocol wars. So when they created this TCP/IP, they had to somehow agree on what the rules are that are fair. So there was this thing from the 1970s to the 1990s. This was this great war to decide what would be the universal communication protocol. So you can forget the acronyms. TCP/IP is the protocol for communication. Okay, it basically means I have an image here. I break it up into a million pieces. I send it over the internet, and I reconfigure it in this computer. And if this computer says, no, but one bit is corrupt, it just asks for that one bit, and then it reliably builds the image back. So when you send your friends an image, every single time the image arrives without corruption. That is what TCP/IP gave us. So, but when they figured out this war, there was a lot of debate, and they called it a war because it got quite rough. But the main thing here was it wasn't just technical. It was philosophical and cultural to it. And the most technical people involved stressed this fact. We'll see that on a later slide. So TCP/IP won the war largely because, again, it's flexible, scalable, and an open nature. And this is the most important part, but by the mid-1990s, most other protocols, okay, completely died because TCP/IP gained the network effect. And the network effect is basically everybody uses WhatsApp, and you send them WhatsApp, they can get your WhatsApp. Now we're moving to Signal or Telegram, but I still have to use WhatsApp because else I can't send a message to my mother. So this war for TCP/IP had some very interesting conferences like this, where they had to figure out what's going to become the standard. And a dispute broke out between these early people. So it's TCP/IP, and another group wanted to replace this IP part of it. And then Windsurf, along with Bob Kahn, they are considered the fathers of the modern internet. So they were very, very influential. He performed the striptease in a three-piece suit, and he had a shirt on that said IP, and he wanted to make the point that IP would run on everything. And today, everything runs on IP. Every single device, every single IoT device, your smart fridge, everything. So Windsurf then later emphasized again that the social culture was vital when they created this early technical progress. And then lastly, this quote is still relevant today. Now, David Clark was another computer scientist that was very prominent in those times and very instrumental in the early internet. He said this: "We reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus and running code." And this today is in the Bitcoin ethos. It was in every step of development, and everybody here is living this. We believe in a rough consensus and running code. So Bitcoin is not a democracy where everybody votes on what needs to happen. It's game theory and consensus, rough consensus. So the longest chain wins, and that's it. That's what they mean by rough consensus. So I'm going to skip over this one very quickly, but so if you see at the bottom there, TCP/IP is a layer. It's a foundational layer, okay, for the entire internet. Even Bitcoin runs on TCP/IP. But the second layer was HTTP. Now, you don't really know what that stands for, but it enabled the World Wide Web. So without TCP/IP was robust, so the information should always arrive from point A to point B. But that means it could be very slow. And if you're old enough, you know how long you waited for an image to load on the internet. So then they built HTTP on top of TCP/IP to enable the web to scale. And this was a very big breakthrough as well. And we use it every single day. Every single time you visit a website, you use HTTP, but you don't know what it is, but you're reliant on it. Again, in the end, it was only achieved because the stable layer of TCP/IP existed. If that layer never existed, then the whole stack ended. So a good protocol, good protocols are sticky. So we're going to not run through all of these, but you can see FTP is 53 years old. TCP/IP is 50 years old. So it's not like the new iPhone is going to come out next year. This thing is 50 years old. They update these things. They don't break consensus to a large part of it, but protocols are sticky. And if you understand this, then you'll understand why some of the talks talk about the other coins is if it was a product or a website or an app, then you can argue that there's going to be a better Uber or something coming out. But if it's a protocol, it becomes a standard, and if it's a standard, you build upon it. Okay. So there at the bottom, we can see all the way from 50 years to 23 years. We saw BitTorrent. I'll have a slide about that as well. And then now Bitcoin is 15 years old this year, which is still very, very young in terms of a protocol. Now, good protocols are not just technically robust, but they're politically robust. So the BitTorrent protocol was invented for peer-to-peer file sharing. And I'm pretty sure everybody knows what BitTorrent is, because when we grew up, Hollywood in the record industry declared full-on war on the torrent sites, and they wanted to stop people from pirating movies and music. And they spent billions and billions on this, and they never made any progress. They shut down one site, and 3 other sites popped up. They put one guy in prison, and 5 other guys popped up. So yeah. Today, anybody on the internet can download open source BitTorrent software and download any media they want without anybody being able to stop them, even though some of the richest people try to block it. So that's a lesson for Bitcoin that we'll get back to later, where you have to be not just technically robust, but politically robust. So it also takes time for protocols to be adopted. So after a decade of work, in 1983, TCP/IP, so the base layer of the internet, was adopted into ARPANET, which was the predecessor of the internet. And then in 1991, the HTTP, the secondary layer I spoke about, was introduced. Okay. So then at the end of the year 2000, this article was released. So 18 years after TCP/IP and 9 years after HTTP, this article came out into the year 2000 saying internet might just be a passing fad as millions of people give up on it. So yeah, it could be very deep in and people could still be doubting it. Bitcoin goes through these same cycles where if the price goes up, people pay attention. If the price goes down, they don't. But Bitcoin keeps ticking along and keeps becoming the standard. So, what is Bitcoin? Again, open, free, and fair protocol, not for communication, but for value transfer. TCP/IP was for robustness. Bitcoin prioritizes security and decentralization. It is slow, stable, and predictable, like a good protocol should be. It has the robustness of BitTorrent baked in because it's also peer-to-peer. So trying to shut it down is equivalent to trying to shut down BitTorrent. Then it was built as a reliable digital money without inflation. So there's never been a protocol, that's achieved this. There's many protocols that try to achieve this, but there's never been a protocol that actually achieved this. And that's why to many of us, Bitcoin is kind of a miracle because it's kind of impossible, but it still happened anyway. Yeah, so this is the big analogy I want to make, okay? So TCP/IP is the base layer for communication, okay? Now Bitcoin is built on top of TCP/IP and other protocols, but Bitcoin also serves as a base layer for value transfer. So HTTP could be built because TCP/IP was built, and at the same time here now we can build stuff like Lightning because Bitcoin, the base layer, exists. So all analogies fall apart eventually, but they can be useful to learn new complicated concepts. So just keep that in mind. So that's what I just explained. TCP/IP is the base layer on the left for communication, and Bitcoin is the base layer for value transfer. TCP/IP prioritized reliability over raw speed, where Bitcoin prioritized decentralization over security. HTTP is a secondary layer. It provides a scalable framework for web communication that today allows us to view websites from wherever, where Lightning provides a scalable framework for instant payments. So these things are very analogous. So for TCP/IP, the secondary layers made the modern internet possible by building on a robust layer. We went from slow, basic, ugly blue links that you had to click and wait forever to now streaming 4K video to millions of people around the world at the same time. And when it buffers, you get mad. So that's quite a big shift there. Then on the Bitcoin side, the secondary layers are making new things possible by building on the robust base layer. We will go from slow, expensive transactions to streaming single sets worth of money multiple times per second. For example, you can build an API that gives you access to data, and you can charge 1 cent. Let's say you want to know what the weather is, you ask the API what the weather is, it tells you back, and you pay it 1 Satoshi without anybody registering, without anybody even caring or knowing who asked it. So it enables new things. So history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. By adopting HTTP, we agreed on a universal language in the digital age. And that was a huge moment. I think a much, much bigger moment than they thought at the time. This agreement led to the emergence of the internet that we know today. So Bitcoin adds a new layer to the internet, being built on top of TCP/IP and other protocols, but it creates this new value transferring layer. If TCP/IP is the universal language, then BTC is the new universal currency. So I don't know if you guys spoke to Paco here that visited 40 countries with just Bitcoin. That's a very early peak of what will be possible in the future, where if it's accepted more and more, all you need to travel is your phone, and you have all you need. So we can now communicate every day with each other directly, but with the universal currency, we'll enter the next phase of development in the internet, where we can't just communicate directly, but we can also send each other money directly without having to rely on anybody or even knowing the other party. Now, we just have to explain what the difference between open and closed protocols, because that is important. Like I said, I can send you an email from any provider to any other provider, but I can't send you a WhatsApp to your Signal account. So this is where this comes in. So an open protocol, that's the one I just said. You can send an email to anywhere. You can visit the website from any hardware computer that's hosted in any country on any other hardware. It doesn't matter. So the rules are open, clear, and fair. It's a free implementation. There's no licensing fees to implement the open protocol. The rules can't just be changed by a small number of people, and the rules are neutral. Now, a lot here you'll hear people like Anita talking about fair, and I like the word fair more, but it means neutral. It means it's not biased towards someone. So when we talk about protocols, we say it's neutral. Closed protocols is the opposite. The WhatsApp Signal example I showed, but the same thing is, if you make a Facebook post, you can't like it on Twitter. Now, right now, that sounds obvious to you, but that in the future, with stuff like Nostr, that is changing. And in my opinion, in 50 years, it'll be very silly that you couldn't like your tweet on Facebook. Same thing is, you can stream on Twitch and YouTube, but you have to go to their sites to view it. So the thing about closed protocols are they're controlled by single entities and they're not fully disclosed, the rules. So they kind of roughly tell you what the rules are, but you don't really know. They often charge licensing fees and subscriptions. The rules can be changed by a small group of people, if not one person at the top, if they own the majority of the shares of that company. They create these ecosystems that benefit themselves, like at the Apple iStore, asking for 30% of all payments that goes through their apps. They're essentially taxing the entire internet, and now we all use it, and we're kind of trapped in this ecosystem. And the biggest reason that people these days see is that you can be banned at any second for whatever reason, and the more as the world's become more and more political, so you can very easily be banned on these closed protocols. So I'm not going to go through these, but TCP/IP killed all of these protocols, okay, because it was open, fair, and robust. These were closed proprietary alternatives to TCP/IP, but they all died. And these are not small players. These are Apple, IBM, Microsoft, Novell. The others was a little bit smaller. Xerox was also very big. But as you can see, in the 1990s to 2000s, they didn't just lose, they died. Because if everybody's using one language and you try to introduce a new language, it's impossible feat. And especially if you want to charge a subscription fee or nobody knows the rules. So, yeah, in the end, TCP/IP won because it gained the network effect. And that's what I just explained. And after 50 years, there's no plans to replace it. We have small incremental changes to make it better in certain ways. And there's this whole IP4, IP6 thing. But even moving from IP4 to IP6 has been an incredible challenge. Because you can't upgrade old hardware, your fridge is not going to be upgraded due to upgrade. So it's been a lot harder than anybody thought just to make a small change like that. So about 5 billion people today use TCP/IP. So if you want to come and introduce a new standard today, you're going to have to convince more than half the world to come onto your new system. So none of these competing are alive. Currently, we use a closed protocol. Now remember, a protocol is just a simple set of rules for communication. So our money that we use is a set of rules. Now, if you go and study the federal system, it gets very, very complicated. And even our Reserve Bank, that's fairly transparent when compared to other reserve banks, you still don't fully know what they're doing and when they're doing it, okay? So a lot of the other talks went into this. I'm not going to spend too much time, but money preceded the state by thousands and thousands of years. So money emerged before the invention of the wheel. That's how old it is. So for all of us alive today, we think that the government runs the money, but money far preceded it. So over time, as the government gained more power, they started to take control of the money. As they increasingly manipulated this money, they eventually removed the link to gold. And many people spoke about this, but at this moment, they permanently severed the money with reality. And they did this to prevent a Great Depression. They had short-term issues that they wanted to fix, and they made a very big long-term decision that influenced the entire world. So for the first time in history, 50 years ago, we were forced to use a closed set of rules for money. And like I said, most of us today are used to the system. We think it's normal because it's all we've ever known, so we just accept it. But we do need an open protocol for money. Like some of us said, as you work, you expend your time and your energy, and you exchange that for money, and you want to save that money to take care of your family in the future. But in the modern times, the state can create that same money out of thin air without expanding that same energy or time. When this happens, the money supply increases without actually any benefit. So if you did your job, you created some value that maybe expanded the company, that increased the profit, that meant they had to employ more people. But if they just created it out of thin air, that economic benefit doesn't happen. So in effect, they are stealing your productivity in that way. And all of this stuff on closed protocols happens behind closed doors. So in a very simple fact, this means that higher prices over time for everybody, without explicitly stating your increasing tax for everybody. So in the end of the day, nobody should have control over this, over your time and your money, as it was before 50 years ago. For the vast majority of history. Now, they did try to pull some other tricks before then, but at least there was a rough link with reality. But for the last 50 years, that has definitely not been the case. So we spoke about the TCP/IP base layer war earlier on. TCP/IP won the base layer war, and all of the competition died. So what we're here today is Bitcoin has won the protocol wars for value transfer. So you can argue in the 2017-2018 cycle, there were some competitors, but there were never really any serious competitors to Bitcoin. The big fight that they call the block size war was actually an internal fight within Bitcoin to decide what should we prioritize. And that's what I said in the beginning, which they decided to prioritize decentralization and security, where the other side of the blockchain war was, again, let's just increase the block size because fees are high now, so let's not take our pain now, let's make the easy decision. So the good news there was the right decision was made, because some of the people here, like Peter Todd and Jimmy Song, they were fighting for a long, robust Bitcoin. So that is a great victory that was won, and by that victory, Bitcoin won the protocol wars for value transfer. And how do we know that Bitcoin has achieved the network effect? Even your grandmother knows or have heard the word Bitcoin. She doesn't know what it is, but she's heard the word Bitcoin. So it's become the Coca-Cola of crypto, the swear word crypto. And this is another quote from Andreas Antonopoulos that Anita also quotes a lot, but the best protocols don't always win. The protocol that is good enough and achieves the network scale often does. Because if everybody uses it, everybody else is forced to use it. So Bitcoin won't simply be replaced. And this, I don't know if you guys were in the talk right now with Bitcoin, not crypto. In every cycle we see this. People lose a lot of money because you have these entrepreneurs that tries to convince you that they know about this project that is the next Bitcoin. But understanding that Bitcoin is a protocol that has already achieved the network effect can save you from this fallacy, because they will use all the technical terms and all the mumbo jumbo to convince you that it's better and faster, because they've got a lot of that token and they want you to buy it, and nothing really else, and they're just using whatever the other people said. So it's these entrepreneurs that convince you that this is the next Bitcoin, and then it's downhill from there. So the local exchanges also don't make this easy. They just keep adding more of these shitcoins over time, while they're lacking very basic Bitcoin support. For example, Lightning Network that many of us use often now, the big exchanges don't accept that yet, because they couldn't make enough money out of it, so they just kind of left it, focusing on adding shitcoins, because trading the shitcoins is how they make money. So Bitcoin is a robust base layer protocol that has already achieved the network effect. Anybody that tries to sell you the next Bitcoin is fooling you to pump their own bags. And I think if people knew this, every cycle crypto gets a bad name because all of these scams come up and they collapse. But if you understand it, that it's a protocol, then you're completely immune to that. So I'm going to skip over this part also pretty quickly, because a lot of people spoke about this. There's a lot of problems in South Africa, but in my opinion, perhaps the biggest problem is the state-owned enterprises, or the SOEs. So if you were at Jimmy Song's talk yesterday, it was all about rent seeking. Now, rent seeking is the polite term for these things. They are parasites. Most of them are parasites. So over time, we've learned this many times, but when the state tries to interfere with the free market and tries to become the asset allocator, it ends in disaster. Because the free market has to compete with each other, and that means that the best project wins. But when you have these SEOs that can't die, they become a parasite, sucking it out of the economy. This means that the government is extracting, at this point, hundreds of billions of rands from the real economy and pumping it into these enterprises. They inevitably become corrupt because they know they can't fail and they don't have to compete, okay? So these SEOs become feeding grounds for corruption by the government and cartels. So this is what the writer said about Eskom. He said it became one big feeding ground for these cartels and these government people. Why? Because it can't fail, then the power dies. So they know they are in the circle forever money. So we know about the big Escoms and the SSAs and the Sunrails. There's the amount of ballast I've gotten. But to make this parasite analogy, I want to just focus on the post office, or what I call the South African parasite office. The SAPO is the definition of a parasite. They've gotten around 14.1 billion rand in bailouts. Recently, despite that, this last financial year, they again reported 2 billion and billion in losses and 8 billion in liabilities, and they are now requesting an additional 3.8 billion. Now, you might say, well, maybe they do provide some value. So My Broadband, a popular local news site, has been doing these tests. In 2008, they did a test with the South African Post Office, and there was a 100% failure rate for both the slow and the fast mail. The last test they did, they sent a package, and after 163 days, the package got returned. And then they had this one epic story of a 13-year delivery where someone sent a package, and then 13 years later it pitched up, and they didn't expect it, and it just showed up. So the point I'm trying to make there is you can't run a business by using the post office. If you run a business and you need to add value, you can't rely on something that has a 100% failure rate. So that means that the actual value that SAPO adds is zero because they're not reliable. I can't send you anything that I actually want to arrive. So what did SAPO do in response? They're now proposing legislation that if you want to send a package less than 1 kilogram, you have to use them by law. Now, this is not a law, but this is what they're proposing. Now, imagine what will happen to Takealot. It will collapse because you can't send a package to the post office because you'll never get it. So e-commerce, so that's the last line there is, SAPO adds no real value, but costs us billion every year and proposes legislations that will destroy other industries. So I'm going to skip over that because I'm seeing we're running out of time here. But these ACOs basically are paid for out of tax, but because there's not enough tax, we have to go into deeper and deeper deficits, and this becomes a parasitic effect because that money could have been invested literally anywhere else, and it could have added value. And now stuff like Eskom just needs these pump-ins just to survive. So over the last decade, the rand has lost exactly 45% of its value against the US dollar. And the fact is that nobody in South Africa thinks that over the long time, the rand will gain value against the dollar. So if that is the fact, then you have to ask yourself, why would you ever hold rand if no one in the market, even the polar opposites of that are normally polar opposites, if you ask them in 10 years, will it be better or worse? They will all say it'll be worse. So Bitcoin, for the first time, provides an alternative to this. With Bitcoin, the government can't force their bad decisions on you. So you're not paying for this inflation, for this SAPO parasite that's sucking everything out of the economy. So they can you'll still have to pay your expensive taxes, but the inflation you can opt out of. There's a strict supply. It can't be confiscated. It's fair and trusted, and it's completely predictable. There's only two rules. There's 21 million, and every 4 years inflation halves. Those are the only two monetary rules that you actually have to know. And if you actually go and try to figure out the Federal Reserve System, you'll have to read books and books to actually figure out what's happening. Where with Bitcoin, there's two rules. So Bitcoin allows you to keep your value outside of this crazy system of SEO parasites. You don't have to go down with the ship anymore. You can stay still here. You can still do your job. You can still add value, but you don't have to keep that value into this collapsing rand. You have an opt-out alternative. And this was never ever before. Well, it's 15 years now, but it's never been this easy before to actually exit the system and still stay here. So we can't force the government to make better decisions, but we have the power to opt out and protect our families from corrupt rulers that are more focused on staying in power than they are about protecting the prospects of the country. So to end it off, the age of open protocols, the future is very bright. Now, this last piece was a little bit negative, but I actually think that the future is extremely bright because of open protocols, okay? We have firsthand seen the power of open protocols with the internet. 50 years ago, we created TCP/IP, and today, just about this conference, no one would be here without the internet. The companies I work at, the biggest companies in the world, are completely on the internet. And that's just because they created a communication protocol. So people love to complain that these elites are sitting somewhere behind closed doors and figuring out our futures for us. But none of them predicted Bitcoin, and they still completely underestimate this thing because they think, you heard them talk about CBTC, they think you're going to opt into this private thing that you don't know the rules of, where they can just freeze your assets when there's this open alternative. People are not stupid. Over the long run, they will naturally move to the open one. So Satoshi did not waste time complaining about the current system or asking permission to create Bitcoin. He stood on the shoulders of giants, both in the research by people like Hal Finney and Adam Back, but also on TCP/IP and all the layers that came before him. So it's an idea that is now actually possible because of the other developments that happened. So we went from one random developer on a mailing list trying to implement an idea that most on the world actually gave up on and thought was impossible because all of the big precursors to Bitcoin failed. So open protocols create a future where you can increasingly opt out and choose the rules that you agree with, okay? Bitcoin has proved this is possible, and this is the exciting part, is it's inspired a renewed energy in creating new open protocols to solve old problems. And no, I don't mean all of the other shit coins. We've already established that Bitcoin is the protocol. If anything else tries to solve the value transfer problem, they're trying to reinvent the wheel. And it's just a waste of time. So what I am talking about is things like Nostr that you might have heard about, or Liquid that you also might have heard about, or Peter Todd that actually gave a presentation in this room yesterday. He created OpenStamps, another protocol on Bitcoin to timestamp certain events in history based on Bitcoin blocks so that you can provably say this happened at that time. So these protocols are evolving. Bitcoin is a bedrock, like TCP/IP was a bedrock for new innovation. So yeah, these protocols for the first time in history provide a peaceful and fair way for humans to cooperate without having to resort to violence. So that's the big part in the beginning where I said, if you try to break the rules, you're either just ignored. So if you try to create 22 million Bitcoin, they're just going to reject you out of the network. There's no police required. There's no enforcement required. So what else can we do like this? That's what Nostr is trying to do with social media. They tried to create the same protocol where you can't just ban anybody or censor anybody. So when it becomes technically impossible to do that, more and more, we can create a better world. So my last line is, open, fair protocols are our best shot at scaling humanity without resulting in a dystopia. Thank you. Yeah, you can ask questions.
Very informative talk. Thank you. I was curious, in this evolution of open protocols, do you anticipate that an open governance protocol might emerge? I don't know if that would necessarily be built on top of Bitcoin, but curious about your thoughts.
So the thing with these protocols are, they're extremely hard. Like, after studying Bitcoin for 10 years, it's still kind of unbelievable to me that it works. Because it's so hard that it doesn't become corrupt by any of these power-grabbing instances. So I think we'll solve, this is completely my opinion, by the way, I think we'll solve these small issues. The base layer of value transfer was a huge step forward, like something that maybe I didn't even expect in my lifetime. So that's very exciting. Lightning is a very, very interesting thing. That Lightning might not even be the filing scaling layer because there are issues, but there might be a layer 3. And the thing is, these layers can go on forever. So what my opinion is, we'll solve some of these issues here and there, and then maybe we can combine these in the end of the day to get to something like that. But in the end of the day, I do think that's the only way to make it fair, because sooner or later a biased government will become in power and then break down whatever the previous well-intentioned government did. So I am hopeful for that. I think it'll be interesting to see how this AI turns out. People are very scared that they will take over the world, but if you can make an open source data set and show everybody exactly how to train that thing, and maybe saying, all right, this thing is pretty fair, maybe we can put it in a small court and see how it performs. But we'll have to get over the stigma there first, because at this point everybody is like, AI equals Terminator. But yeah, I'm optimistic that something like that can happen, and more will happen. So
Super interesting.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Sorry? Yes. Okay. Any more questions?